Well, now, when we are, well, we concentrate on the towns. Uh, I have already told that those are the places where the craftsmen live, and they are highly dependent on the villages around. Um, and some of the townspeople might have some relatives or even some farms around the villages. Around the villages, at the villages around the town. Um, it might be possible that a family member runs the village, or in societies where slavery was common, slaves might be running the land. Uh, but increasingly, it also becomes common that at least in terms of food, towns are not anymore self-sufficient. And in many cases, they also need at least metals that come from other places. I mean, obviously, not every town or every village has copper, tin, or iron ores, which were necessary for basic production after a certain point in history. And uh, besides that, well, each house inside of the town is still, to some extent, self-sufficient. So many needs are still met by the uh, households of the town, although families could be a little bit, could be to some extent smaller in the towns, and whenever they are larger, they might also run a shop with a specific, which specific produce specific product. So in a way, I mean, each house specialize in production of something, which might be butchering, which might be hair cutting, which might be weaving, which might be blacksmith, which makes metal work. It can be many others. I mean, doctors, for example, are another example. Uh, Typically, all of these services are also, to some extent, also with reduced quality, available, uh, made also in the villages. I mean, in case of medical care, of course, reduced quality might be some people might die because they don't get the best quality healthcare. However, I mean, uh, at least in villages, also people know what to do, how to do basic things to treat a sick patient. Um, so for the villages, basically, the townspeople are usually producing things that are luxury. Well, even today, when I stayed in a village of a friend, well, I realized that the bread we call in the city white bread, the one with relatively more volume, that's much more famous than the flat bread, the traditional village bread uh, done, which is much more. I mean, it is a contains a large area, but uh, it doesn't have a volume. It is very thin. It's called dürüm in some cases. I mean, it's used for dürüm. Lavaş ekmeği is called name in Turkey. Pita is what is called in the United States. For example, um, in India, that bread also, I mean, I believe naan bread has also a special name. Well, uh, in Turkey, it is also called village bread, as I said before. So whatever done in the cities is more common and famous and considered as luxury. I mean, it is seen as a more luxury uh, item compared with the bread that is done and already available every day in the city. But those luxury items are only bought if the villagers have enough surplus product. So if they have enough surplus product, if they have more than enough uh, food that produced, then they come to the cities and they exchange with this food. I mean, not the food in terms of cooked food, but I mean, like grain, basically, with or milk from their cows, or sheep, uh, with what is being produced in the towns and in the village, in towns and in some cases, if there's a close city nearby, in cities. Um, so for the towns, if the villages have surplus, they are better off. But if the villages, the food production in villages is relatively limited, if it is a bad harvest, basically, then towns faced with a very low demand. I mean, the craftsmen in town might find out they are not selling enough of their products even to survive. And that fact actually has created the formation of guilds. Guilds are actually built for every crafts in different towns, as old as the ancient era. But they reached their most colorful um, era in the Middle Ages, and they declined in with the emergence of the capitalism. Although some of them still survive. For example, in Turkey, Apothekers Guild is still alive, for example. And some of them also changed formation, become what is called in Turkey Oda, basically. Apothekers Guild also has become Oda, Eczacılar Odası in Turkey. Oda means chamber of apothekers, it's called that. Guilds actually mostly were in the polytheist era. They had a patron god. Then in the monotheist countries, they started to have a patron saint, um, and they had a very colorful organization with specific ceremonies, basically. Um, and as we have seen, they also were they were doing two things actually. They um, were limiting the supply of the labor. They don't allow everyone to become a craftsman. Only with the guild's approval you can become a craftsman, which also means, I mean, guilds, of course. In theory, we might say that everyone who passes a certain standard becomes a craftsman, but in practice, guilds might increase or decrease standards, and basically also determine number of craftsmen inside of the town, so that they make sure there aren't too many craftsmen in the town, which will decrease the demand to too low level. And then they set standards and quality, minimum standards for the product. If you are producing below the minimum standards, then you are out of the guild. You are not allowed to perform that craft in that town or city, basically. But those minimum standards also mean that wherever you go, the standards are the same. And basically, this minimum standard uh, uh, minimum standard set by the guild, that the demand for the craft be relatively equally distributed between the available craftsmen in the town. You know, wherever you go, you will have similar standard of good or service, basically. And also in Turkey, if you have heard, I mean, uh, the craftsmen that survive today, they say in the old days, if a craftsman had sufficient number of customers, they sent the coming customers to the other craftsmen, uh, because they will say, "I had enough. Uh, uh, my my neighbor should have also uh, should earn some money today." So competition is highly discouraged within the guilds. So that's an important aspect of the guild. So pretty much it is encouraged within the guild. Uh, Precautions are taken to spread the demand relatively equally between the craftsmen, so that no one gets too low demand, basically, especially at the time when demand tends to fall frequently to critical low values. Um, so now we can start talking on the cities and empires. Cities are few, and when they exist, usually there are two types of them. First one is basically first one controls merchants who are controlling trade in a large area, so they are trade centers in a way. Um, and second part types are the administrative centers of empires. Well, in some cases, the trade centers might also evolve to the empire centers of the empires. But once empires form, they tend to create also their own um, capital city, either by building a city from scratch or, in some cases, um, transforming a relatively small city into the center of the empire, basically. So they tend to leave their mother cities, the empires, because the emperor the citizens of the mother city sometimes see themselves as shareholder of the assets of the empire, and emperor doesn't like that necessarily. And even after the new cities are found, in many cases, empires change capital cities relatively fast, relatively more often, let's say. Uh, for in Iran, we can see that for the Iranian uh, Iranian empires. I mean, for example, the Seljuk Empire changed. I mean, at least three times they have changed the capital city. Um, Even Rome changed the capital city and to the Constantinopolis, basically. Um, well, empires basically protect cities and towns, so their main function is protective. We have seen this also in the world system theory, and they were agents of redistribution. Uh, they produce infrastructure and they set social rules, which makes interaction between communities throughout the empire easier. So basically, uh, well, empires built by force and kind of the with the institutions, like their armies, like the roads they build and the overall rules, they make the other parts of the empire remain connected, and basically that connection might also to some extent encourage trade, because they provide safety for the people who want to trade, but also they also provide infrastructure necessary for the trade. But also the empires are redistributive, which means actually they get taxes from all parts of the empire, and in return they build something. Usually, as I said, infrastructure and safety measures, and some help in case of emergency, like flood, throughout the different regions of the empire. Um, so that was basically their function. Um I will continue in the next parts.